Emily Carter trusted two people more than anyone in the world: her husband Daniel Carter and her mother Linda Harris. And in one single moment, that trust was shattered in a way no one could have imagined. The house stood at the end of a quiet street, painted in soft colors that blended perfectly with the calm surroundings. Neighbors saw it as a symbol of stability, a place where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Inside, life followed a predictable routine shaped by years of habit. Mornings began early, evenings ended on time, and weekends were reserved for rest and family obligations. From the outside, it appeared to be a marriage built on patience and mutual respect, the kind people pointed to as an example of long-term commitment. The relationship had grown slowly over the years, supported by shared responsibilities and a carefully maintained image of harmony. Arguments, if they existed, were hidden well. Decisions were made practically, and emotions were rarely allowed to surface. Trust was assumed, not questioned. The husband was seen as dependable and calm, someone who valued order and control. The wife believed her life was secure, grounded in routine and familiarity. There was comfort in knowing what each day would bring, and that comfort created a sense of safety that no one thought to challenge. The mother's presence in the house had become normal over time. What began as short visits gradually turned into extended stays. She helped with household tasks, offered guidance, and filled spaces that felt empty. Her involvement was welcomed at first, seen as support rather than intrusion. Slowly, her influence grew, blending into the daily rhythm of the home. Boundaries softened, then quietly disappeared. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested danger or deception. Laughter still echoed during meals, and daily responsibilities continued without interruption. Yet beneath the surface, something fragile was forming. Small changes went unnoticed, dismissed as stress or fatigue. The house remained peaceful, but the sense of security was false. Unseen forces were already at work, preparing to tear apart everything that once felt unbreakable. The return home was never meant to be early. The day had followed a different plan, one that would have kept the house empty for several more hours. A sudden change shifted everything, turning an ordinary afternoon into the beginning of something irreversible. As the front door opened, the familiar comfort of home failed to appear. Instead, the air felt heavy, thick with an unease that could not be explained. The silence was deeper than usual, pressing in from every corner. Small details immediately felt wrong. Shoes were scattered near the entrance, placed carelessly rather than neatly aligned. A light remained on in a room that was usually empty at that hour. The faint scent of perfume drifted through the hallway, unfamiliar yet impossible to ignore. Each step forward felt slower, weighed down by a growing sense that something inside the house had shifted beyond repair. The walls seemed to close in as the path toward the bedroom became unavoidable. The quiet was broken only by the sound of breathing, not clearly heard but somehow sensed. The closer the door came into view, the stronger the tension grew. This was no longer a simple moment of surprise. The mind raced through possibilities, clinging to denial while preparing for something worse. The hand reached the door with hesitation. Time stretched thin, turning seconds into something unbearable. When the door opened, the room revealed a scene that erased all doubt. The truth arrived without warning, sharp and final. There was no space for confusion, no chance to look away. Everything that had felt stable suddenly collapsed. In that instant, the past rewrote itself. Trust dissolved completely, replaced by disbelief and a deep sense of violation. The house, once a place of safety, became unfamiliar and hostile. The early return had exposed more than a secret. It exposed the fragile lie holding the family together. Nothing would ever feel normal again, and the consequences of that single moment were only begging. The moment of discovery did not pass quickly. It lingered, stretching into something heavy and unreal. The mind struggled to process what the eyes had already confirmed. This was not a misunderstanding or a mistake that could be explained away. It was a clear violation of trust, layered with a betrayal so personal that it struck deeper than anger. Shock took control first, numbing every thought and reaction. The weight of what had been uncovered pressed down hard. It was not only the act itself, but who was involved that made it unbearable. Marriage vows had been broken, but so had the sacred bond between parent and child. Two worlds that should never have crossed had collided in the most damaging way. The sense of safety that once defined the home vanished instantly, replaced by a cold awareness that everything familiar had been built on lies. Memories began to resurface with new meaning. Shared meals, quiet conversations, moments of comfort and care all twisted into something suspicious. What once felt genuine now appeared staged. Every smile and kind gesture from the past seemed rehearsed, designed to hide the truth. The realization that deception had lived so close, unnoticed, created a deep sense of self-doubt. The room itself felt different, as though it carried the weight of what had happened there. Walls that once offered privacy now felt like witnesses. The bed, a symbol of trust and intimacy, became a reminder of humiliation and loss. There was no escape from the image burned into memory. This discovery was not just emotional damage. It was a turning point. The balance of power shifted instantly. Control, trust, and loyalty collapsed in one moment. What had been revealed could never be undone or forgiven easily. The shock was only the beginning. Beneath it, anger, grief, and a desire for answers began to rise. The truth had surfaced, and it would soon demand consequences far beyond that room. The days that followed brought no relief, only deeper confusion. Pieces of the past began to rearrange themselves, forming a picture that was impossible to ignore. Small inconsistencies that once seemed harmless now stood out sharply. Late nights, unexplained errands, sudden changes in routine all took on new meaning. What had been dismissed as coincidence slowly revealed itself as careful planning. Evidence appeared without being searched for. Forgotten notes, hidden phone records, and unexplained expenses pointed toward a long-running secret. The affair had not grown out of a single moment of weakness. It had developed quietly, protected by lies and opportunity. The realization that it had been happening for months, possibly longer, made the betrayal feel calculated rather than emotional. The most painful part was understanding how easily trust had been used as cover. Familiar spaces had been turned into meeting points. Ordinary days had been shaped around deception. Every shared family moment now felt contaminated by the knowledge that something false had existed beneath it. The past could no longer be remembered without doubt creeping in. As the truth unfolded, manipulation became clear. Subtle emotional control had kept suspicions away. Guilt had been redirected. Sympathy had been used as a shield. The people closest had known exactly how to remain unnoticed. This awareness brought a new kind of pain, one rooted in humiliation and self-blame. The home itself felt like a map of secrets. Each room carried unanswered questions. Silence filled the spaces where trust once lived. Sleep became difficult, and thoughts refused to slow. There was no comfort in familiarity anymore. Everything felt exposed. What emerged from this web of secrets was not just betrayal, but intention. Choices had been made repeatedly, without regret. This understanding changed everything. It marked the moment when forgiveness stopped being possible and survival became the priority. As the secret became impossible to contain, the atmosphere inside the house shifted into something suffocating. Every movement felt watched, every silence loaded with meaning. The betrayal had been exposed, but control had not been released. Instead, it tightened. The walls that once offered comfort now seemed to trap everyone inside an invisible struggle for power. Nothing was said openly, yet everything was understood. Fear replaced shame. The consequences of exposure loomed large, threatening reputations, financial security, and social standing. The pressure to keep the truth buried created a dangerous imbalance. Guilt no longer existed in isolation. It was mixed with desperation. Subtle actions revealed an attempt to rewrite reality, to make the situation seem less severe than it was. Responsibility was avoided, and blame shifted quietly, leaving confusion in its wake. Isolation became deliberate. Friends and extended family were kept at a distance. Daily routines were altered to limit contact with the outside world. The goal was containment, not healing. This emotional confinement deepened the sense of vulnerability. The house felt smaller, the air heavier, as if escape was slowly being removed as an option. Financial control added another layer of tension. Access to resources became restricted, and dependence was used as leverage. Decisions that once belonged to mutual trust now carried hidden conditions. The sense of autonomy weakened, replaced by uncertainty and quiet panic. Survival began to feel like a calculation rather than a choice. The most disturbing realization was that remorse was absent. What remained was strategy. Every action seemed designed to protect one thing only: secrecy. The betrayal had evolved into something more dangerous than infidelity. It had become a situation where truth was treated as a threat. By this stage, the home was no longer a place of family. It was a pressure chamber. And under that pressure, something was bound to be. The night arrived without warning, carrying a strange sense of finality. The house was unusually quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Tension that had been building for days finally reached its limit. Sleep was impossible, and every sound felt amplified. The air was thick with fear, confusion, and unresolved anger, creating a dangerous mix that refused to settle. What happened inside the house that night unfolded quickly, driven by panic rather than reason. The pressure to control the situation collided with a need to escape it. Emotions that had been suppressed for too long erupted, turning private betrayal into irreversible action. By the time the night ended, nothing remained the same. Morning revealed a disturbing absence. One person was gone, leaving behind a house that felt hollow and disturbed. Personal belongings were missing, while others were left behind carelessly, suggesting haste. The silence now carried a different meaning. It was no longer tense, but alarming. Attempts to explain the disappearance failed, raising immediate concern. As hours passed, worry turned into alarm. Authorities were contacted, and the quiet street transformed into a scene of flashing lights and whispered speculation. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as the once private family crisis became public. The home was searched, and familiar rooms were examined with suspicion rather than comfort. What shocked everyone was how quickly the narrative shifted. This was no longer a story of betrayal alone. It had become a mystery with serious implications. Investigators noted inconsistencies that did not align with a simple disappearance. The timing, the missing items, and the emotional state of those left behind pointed toward something far more troubling. That night marked the point of no return. Whatever had happened could not be undone or hidden. The truth, buried under fear and secrecy, had begun to surface. And once it did, it would demand answers that no one was prepped. The investigation moved forward with quiet intensity, peeling back layers that had been carefully hidden. What first appeared to be a sudden disappearance began to reveal a clear pattern. Timelines were reconstructed, and movements were analyzed in detail. Every action from the days leading up to that night was examined, exposing inconsistencies that could no longer be ignored. What seemed like panic now looked deliberate. Financial records uncovered unusual activity. Withdrawals had been made shortly before the disappearance, and accounts showed signs of preparation rather than impulse. Travel searches, deleted data, and altered schedules suggested planning. This was not an act driven by shock alone. It was an attempt to control the outcome before consequences could arrive. The betrayal had shifted into calculation. Physical evidence inside the house told its own story. Signs of disturbance were subtle but meaningful. Objects had been cleaned, repositioned, or removed entirely. Investigators recognized these details as efforts to erase traces rather than accidents. Familiar rooms no longer appeared innocent. Each space held clues pointing toward intention. As attention narrowed, suspicion moved in an unexpected direction. The person who appeared most composed drew increasing focus. Calm behavior, once seen as strength, now raised concern. Statements changed slightly over time, and minor contradictions added up. The image presented to the outside world began to crack. The most shocking revelation came when the motive became clear. Fear of exposure, loss of control, and public disgrace formed a powerful combination. Protecting an image had become more important than protecting life. The investigation revealed that loyalty had never been equal. One person had always been expendable. By the end of the inquiry, the truth stood undeniable. What began as betrayal had escalated into a deliberate act meant to silence consequences. The case no longer asked what had happened. When the case finally came to an end, there was no sense of closure, only a quiet emptiness left behind. The legal process had delivered its conclusion, but it could not repair the damage that had already spread through every part of life connected to the house. What remained was the weight of knowing that everything familiar had been destroyed from the inside. Justice had been defined on paper, but peace was far more difficult to find. The home was sold soon after, stripped of its past, and passed to strangers unaware of its history. The street returned to its normal rhythm, yet the story refused to disappear. Neighbors continued to whisper, and the case became a cautionary tale, retold in fragments and half-remembered details. What once seemed unthinkable had become a warning about how easily trust can decay. The emotional aftermath lingered far longer than the investigation itself. Trauma reshaped identity, forcing a future built on survival rather than certainty. Memories could not be erased, only learned to be carried. The betrayal had left scars that no verdict could remove. Healing, if it came at all, arrived slowly and unevenly. The most haunting truth was how quietly everything had begun. No dramatic signs had announced the collapse. It started with blurred boundaries, unspoken desires, and secrets protected by silence. By the time the damage became visible, it was already irreversible. Ordinary people, placed under pressure and fear, had made choices that changed lives forever. In the end, the story stood as a reminder that the most dangerous crimes are not always sudden or violent at first. They often grow in private, hidden behind familiar faces and trusted relationships. When truth is ignored and accountability avoided, consequences do not disappear. They wait, and when they finally surface, they leave nothing untouched.